Hi, everybody. Thank you all for having me tonight. I'm glad you could be here. And so my name is Nisha Ajmani. I am an attorney at Housing and Economic Rights Advocates. We're based in Oakland, but we serve the state on issues related to homeownership as well as tenants. So I focus on tenants' rights. And the focus is on credit and debt issues affecting tenants. So that's the bulk of my work, but I also help tenants who deal with things like habitability problems or other types of disputes with their landlords. Fair housing, anti-discrimination work is also part of the work that we do at HERA. So that's a general summary. And I just, again, want to thank you all for being here. I know there's a lot going on in the world and in your lives. So it takes a lot of effort sometimes to take this time aside to focus on helping you understand credit and financial wellness. So I'm really glad you're here. So I'm going to go ahead and just dive into the content. Oh, and before I forget, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. Around 6:45, we'll take a little break and open it up for questions, but definitely put questions in the chat box as you go. Just make sure they're not personal or confidential because there are other folks in the room. If there is a question that you have that's specific to a case you're dealing with, or a friend, or a client or something, we'll have our contact information at the end. So you can call HERA directly if you want some assistance on a specific issue you're dealing with. So this is the agenda that we have for tonight. So first I'll discuss generally debt and debt collection issues. Then I'll discuss credit reporting and credit and how things might show up on your credit report. Then I'll talk about identity theft and how to go about the complaint process if that happens, and then we'll open it up for questions at the end. Okay, so just generally, what is debt? Credit and debt are terms that are thrown around a lot, but it is helpful to know what exactly they mean. So money you borrow on the condition that you pay it back, usually with extra charges like interest, is debt. So credit is the money you receive. So for example, a credit card, you borrow money that you receive from the credit card company, you use that money, and then you owe them the amount that you paid, just kind of generally. And then if you don't pay it all back, sometimes there's interest, right? So debt is the money that you owe in return. There's generally good versus bad debt. So credit or debt can be helpful if it puts you in a better financial position in the present or at some point in the future. Bad debt can end up costing you much more than you receive in credit. So it's important to ask yourself some questions and take a look at all of the terms and everything that goes into a possible credit, application and agreement. So some of the questions you can ask yourself are, will taking out this debt help me be in a better financial position in the future? Can I afford to pay it back? How much will this credit cost me? And we'll go into that in more detail later. But some examples can be student loans. If they're legitimate, obviously it's probably going to be a lot of money. But if you're taking out student loans now, it might help in the long term put you off in a better financial position. You might get a higher paying job or something of that nature. And then can you afford to pay it back? Is there a really high interest rate, for example, like 600%, or is it a decent interest rate, like under 10%? How much will it cost me? Again, I'll give some examples later of how to kind of determine how much the credit will cost you. So for example, with interest or other charges and fees. So how much are you actually paying over the long term to receive this credit? And there's secured versus unsecured debt. So secured debt, this debt has an asset, so like some type of property, so a car or a house attached to it. So if you don't pay back your debt, the lender can take that asset, whether it's a car or the house, as payment for the debt. So in this situation, an auto lender might repossess the car, or a house might go into foreclosure if somebody is late on their mortgage and doesn't pay it for a certain amount of time. It can also come into play with pawn loans. Then there's unsecured debt. So this debt does not have some sort of property attached to it. These loans, if you don't pay them back, go into collection. So credit cards is a common example of that, department store charge cards, and other types of accounts like that. So just to be aware, sometimes relying on credit cards can get people into kind of trap. And we understand, sometimes it is easier, to rely on credit cards and use credit cards as a form of borrowing. And you can get a revolving line of credit, and it can require only a minimum payment each month, but it could end up costing more in the long run. And here's an example down here. So let's say the amount that you pay each month is you pay the minimum payment only. So here, let me back up. So this is the assumption here is that there's a credit card debt of about $6,081. So this would pay, if you pay the minimum payment each month, it would take you 14 years to pay it back. And the interest over time would be $4,064. And then the total owed, including interest over the lifetime, would be $10,145. If you double the minimum payment, it would take a lot less to pay back. In terms of time, about 5.5 years. You would pay less in interest, and you would owe total over the course of the debt repayment a lot less than up here if you only pay the minimum payment. So you'd pay $7,590 total, and then let's say you pay the minimum payment plus $100. So that would take approximately 3.5 years, and the interest rate would, of course, be lower. The total owed would be $7,490. So it's maybe only $100 total than this one, but you're still paying it off in quite a lot less time. So 2 years less than if you just double the minimum payment. So another thing to keep in mind is that on your credit report, if you only pay the minimum payment, you can get an entry on the report that says high credit, which means that even though you're paying every single month, let's say you're paying on time, it still can appear as a detrimental or negative entry because you're spending a lot and not repaying. While you're repaying, the minimum payment, it's still going to reflect negatively on your credit report. So we generally recommend that people pay at least 30% of what they owe on their credit cards and other similar types of credit accounts each month. Okay, so avoiding debt traps that leave you constantly owing money with no way out. So a debt trap is when you must take out an additional loan to make payments on the first loan. So payday loans are a common example of this, small dollar loans. They usually have a very short repayment period, high interest rate, and high fees. And so people are forced to kind of borrow again and again, and it becomes this unfortunate cycle can be very hard to get out of. Here are some other examples: deposit advance loans, tax advance loans. So short-term loan made by banks, which is secured by a borrower's deposit account. So the borrower has an account with the bank, and then this short-term loan is secured, meaning the property that's attached to it, if the borrower doesn't pay back on the loan, is their own deposit account. So that can be put people in a really difficult situation if they fall behind. And repayment is due when direct deposit is made into the account. There's also a risk of overdraft as well. So it's helpful to have some information about what to look for when you're trying to find credit. So here's important information. You want to make sure to check the TILA box, and TILA stands for Truth in Lending Act, which is a federal law all about how lenders have to make sure to be transparent about certain information when people are looking into applying for credit. So there's annual percentage rate, the cost of your credit at a yearly rate. So this is the interest rate. The finance charge, the dollar amount the credit will cost you. The amount financed, that's the amount of credit provided to you or on your behalf. And the total of the payment, so the amount you will have paid after you have made all payments as scheduled. So everything total that you will pay at the end, so including interest and fees and that sort of thing. And then just keep in mind that there are affordable alternatives that don't have higher interest rates. You're not going to see some of the more kind of predatory components in general with some of these alternatives, like lending circles, credit unions, that sort of thing. So I'm going to just kind of show you by comparing these two options side by side, just generally what we might see. So on the left is banks and credit unions, and then sample loan, and then on the right is check cashing stores, like small dollar loans, that sort of thing. On the right, and it's the same amount of the loan, so $2,500 for a personal loan, but it has different terms. So the one on the left would have to be paid over 12 months. One on the right, you would have more time to pay it off, 2 years, so double the amount of time. This one has a much lower percentage rate, APR, sorry, and so 7.99, a finance charge of $109. Amount provided, lent is $2,500, and then the total amount of payments over the course of the loan term, 12 months, is $2,609, and the monthly payment would be $217. So over here on the right, again, it's $2,500, but paid over a longer period of time, but it has a much higher interest rate, 100%. The finance charge is $3,358. The amount financed, again, is $2,500. However, the total amount of payments is more over here, so more than double than the credit unions and what's on the left. It's on the left on my screen. I don't know if that's how it's showing up, but the rainbow lollipop is the credit unions. So the total of payments over here for the seller is $5,858, and then the monthly payment is $244. So I'm just curious. I don't know if there's a way to keep this slide on the screen while we do this poll, but I am curious to hear. Oh, sorry, I just didn't realize that these little things pop up. So I'm curious to hear what folks think about these two options. and what you would do if you're comparing loans and trying to decide which one you would want to apply for. So I'll put it back on this screen. So feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat box, or ask a question. I'm happy to talk.
And if you like to raise your hand in the reaction area, the reaction with the little smiley face, you can raise the hand or open up your mic, or you can put your response in the chat.
Yeah, so I'm seeing the chat box. Yeah, people are saying the bank and the credit union, the one on the left, and that's true. So sometimes I think maybe it might be attractive to see, oh, I'm going to have more time to pay off the one on the right with the seller, but really the one on the left, the monthly payments are going to be less. The total amount you pay over time will be less. The finance charge is a lot less, and it's a much smaller annual percentage rate. So that's correct. The one on the left is a better option. Okay, so back to debt collection basics. One of the first things you want to try to figure out is, let's say you receive a letter and somebody is saying you owe money. Who is saying this? Well, first of all, do you recognize the company? But then there are three different people or types of entities that might be contacting you. One is the original creditor, which is the original lender. So let's say Bank of America lent you money, and you receive a letter from Bank of America. This isn't 100% true in every case. You'll definitely want to just assess it, but Bank of America in this simple example would be the original creditor. Then there's debt buyers. So in some cases, another company will buy the debt from the original lender, and then they will be the ones contacting you. So the original lender doesn't have possession of the debt anymore. They've sold it off. And then there's debt collectors, and debt collectors are companies that are either hired by the original creditor to collect the debt. So the original creditor might still own the debt, but they've hired this debt collection company to contact you to try to actually collect the debt. Debt buyers can also be debt collectors. So it can be a little bit confusing. So maybe the debt buyer bought the debt and then they're also trying to collect the debt. And so different laws apply depending on who's trying to collect the debt. So original creditors, so the original lenders, the state law only applies. So that's called the Rosenthal Act. And these are all consumer protection laws covering consumer debt, not business debt. Debt buyers, there's a state law, that's a Fair Debt Buyers Practices Act, and federal law, which is the Fair Debt Collections Practices Act. Then debt collectors, the state law and the federal law also apply to debt collectors. So this is just a kind of a general timeline of what might happen in a debt collection case. So let's say someone is late on a payment or a credit card, and then they fall behind by 30 days, typically, or at least 30 days, but often more. So typically the lender will report the debt as a loss for accounting purposes. So this is called a charge-off. So this is just really an internal procedure, but it will show up on a credit report, for example, as Sometimes it's CO, the initial CO, or it says charge off. So the borrower still owes the debt. Legal term is liable. And then this usually happens 120 to 180 days after, and usually it's within this time frame. Kind of depends on what type of debt. There are different laws depending on what type of debt it is, for when it can be reported on someone's credit report. So at some point, though this isn't always the case, the lender will sell the debt to a debt buyer. So the original creditor sells your loan to a debt buyer for much less than the debt balance, and then the debt buyer attempts to collect on the debt. So around this time, you might start receiving phone calls or letters. However, the original creditor doesn't always sell the debt. So sometimes it just goes from charge off to complaint. So then after the debt is sold, or the original creditor decides that they want to sue for the debt, they'll start the complaint process. So the owner of the debt, again, it could be the original creditor or the debt buyer, will file a lawsuit against you. So it's important to know that there is a 4-year statute of limitations here. So that means that the debt owner or the debt buyer, they have 4 years from the time that you became delinquent on the debt to sue you. So 4 years. So let's say you fell behind in January of 2021. Let's say in February 2021, you were 30 days late, and then you weren't able to pay at all. You just weren't able to pay at all. So the creditor or the debt buyer would have until February of 2025 to sue, because it's 4 years from the time that you are 30 days late. It can get kind of complicated sometimes. Let's say you start paying again and then fall behind again, then it might kind of change up the statute of limitations. But in general, yeah, 4 years. And then there, between the complaint and the judgment or default judgment, there should be, opportunities to try to get some sort of settlement agreement. You should definitely, if you get served with a summons and complaint, contact a lawyer or legal aid agency. Contact HERA if you need help. But for help responding to the lawsuit, because it's really important that you respond so you won't get a default judgment. And judgment means that you lost the case. So if there's a judgment, your wages can be garnished, there can be liens on your property. There are some claims of exemption, and some people are judgment proof, meaning they can prove in some way that they don't have the ability to pay the debt. So sometimes, like, we've had cases where the person has been elderly and on like SSI and has a disability, so there really is nothing that the debt owner can try to collect on. So sometimes it might make sense to, earlier on in the case, send what's called a judgment proof letter, and sometimes that can prevent the plaintiff, which is the either the creditor, original creditor, or the debt buyer, from continuing with the lawsuit. It doesn't always happen that way, unfortunately, but sometimes it can. They might dismiss the lawsuit or just not try to continue litigation. So just something to keep in mind. Okay, so dealing with a debt collector, just some advice. Don't give out sensitive information. You don't need to speak with debt collectors. Ask them to send an explanation of the debt in writing before you agree to speak with them. Don't give out information like your social security or bank account numbers. If you feel threatened or bullied, hang up. So this is important. I'll talk about this later, but even if you do recognize the debt, it's helpful to ask them to provide documentation about why they believe you owe the debt. So that way they're held to a standard of providing proof that you owe it. Keep good records, save everything debt collectors send. Definitely don't throw away letters. I've had clients do that. I understand you get angry or upset, but it's really important to keep all documentation. Keep copies of everything you send to them. Try to, if possible, send things in writing, so over email or letters, and make copies. Write down dates, times, and notes for every call. You can keep a little table where you write down on this, you have the date and then who you spoke with and then what the conversation was. Get legal advice immediately if you're sued on a debt. If you're served, like I mentioned before, if you're served with a lawsuit and you don't respond within 30 days, the debt collector can get a default judgment against you, which means you automatically lose, and your wages could be garnished. So it is important to keep in mind that there are unfortunately scams out there, debt settlement companies, debt relief companies. They claim they can negotiate with your creditors to reduce the amount you owe. Dealing with them can be risky and have found to be ineffective in reducing debt, and you may wind up owing more. So some of them are definitely frauds. They might collect money up front, which they can't do, and then they say they're going to do certain things to get items on your credit report removed or pay off the debt, and sometimes they don't do those, but then they have your money. So it's definitely really important to be mindful about these types of companies. They also might tell you to stop paying your credit card bills, which would cause you to have late fees and interest and other charges. And then these companies also cannot promise that a creditor will reduce your debt after you stop paying. And they do not help you if you are sued on the debt after you stop paying. And then they also often charge pretty expensive fees without really showing you what they're doing for you. So just be very mindful. Okay, some more about dealing with creditors. So how to stop collection calls and notices. A debt collector must stop all communication with you except through a lawsuit on a debt if you tell them to stop contacting you. You can also tell the debt collector how they can and can't contact you, and then make sure all of your requests are in writing. So things debt collectors cannot do or say: they can't call you before 8 a.m. or after 9 p.m., can't harass, threaten you, contact your boss, friends, and neighbors and ask them about your debt, lie, demand that you owe more, add unauthorized fees. So make sure that the person contacting you has the legal right to collect this debt. So this is there's something called a debt validation letter. So this is something you'll want to do. There's kind of a standard template that you can use. But you want to make sure, even if you recognize the company or the debt, you want to make sure that they actually have the right to contact you about the debt, and that they can provide proof that you owe the debt. So make sure that all agreements to pay or settle old debts are in writing. Make sure that the debt is not past the statute of limitations, which is the 4 years, or otherwise uncollectible before you make any payments. Ask the debt collector the name and address of the original creditor and the original account number, the date that the account was first opened, the date of the last recorded payment on the account, the date that the debt was sold to the debt buyer and the amount of the debt at the time, the name, address, and phone number of the debt collector, the amount of the debt, including an explanation of fees such as interest or collection costs, so kind of a breakdown of every dollar, and then ask to send that they send you documents showing that the debt collector has a right to collect the debt. So if the debt collector bought the debt from the creditor, they should show that, they should provide that agreement with the original creditor, or something, you know, that shows that they own it. Okay, so what if the debt isn't yours? You should dispute the claim. So you should send a letter to the debt collector. Here's an example. Then send a copy to the 3 credit reporting agencies. So you may lose the ability to dispute the claim if you wait until after a court issues a judgment. So if there's a lawsuit against you for a debt and you lose, you might lose the ability to dispute the debt if you wait until after the court has issued a judgment against you. So here's just kind of a, you know, an example of what it would look like. Dear collector's name, I'm responding to your contact about collecting a debt. You contact me by XYZ and identify the debt as, and then they would give you some sort of information about the debt. And then I do not have any responsibility for the debt you're trying to collect. So here it would help to get some assistance from a legal services organization because there might be certain legal reasons why you don't owe the debt, or there most likely is. So you might want to get some more specifics about why you believe you don't owe the debt. And then you'll also just want to say, please stop all communications with me at this address and record that I dispute having any obligation for this debt. So usually what will happen here is that once you send a dispute letter on your credit report, it will say the account is in dispute. And then the credit agencies, once they receive information that the account is in dispute, will need to do an investigation of the account. Okay, so dealing with a debt buyer. If you're receiving debt collection calls, letters, or emails from a company whose name is unfamiliar, it could be an agency that the creditor hired to collect the debt, or it could be a debt buyer. So as I mentioned, the original creditor might hire a debt collection company, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that debt collection company bought the debt. And sometimes the debt collection company did buy the debt. So this is some more information about what happens if you're dealing with a debt buyer. So if a debt buyer purchases a debt after January 1st, 2014, they must have specific information and evidence of your debt before trying to collect. They must tell you in writing that you have a right to the information of your rights to this information, give you copies of the information within 15 days of you requesting it, or else stop collecting until it does. So here, this is definitely a situation where you should send a debt validation letter requesting copies of documents showing that you owe the debt and that they own it. And then they have to respond within 15 days. And they have to notify that they will not sue on, or if more than 7 years, report time barred debt. So on credit reports, negative entries can be on there if they're accurate, if they're correct, for 7 years. So let's say you became a delinquent on paying back a credit card. While the credit card company, or let's say its original creditor, has 4 years to sue you from the time you became delinquent, the delinquency can still be on your credit report for longer. So it can be on your credit report for 7 years, as long as it's accurate. If it's not accurate, obviously you'll want to dispute that and try to get it off your credit report. And then if the initial oral contact is in a language other than English, mandatory communications have to be in that same language. Okay, so some debts have special types of relief. So medical debt, you might be able to get a discounted payment plan. There's also a program called Charity Care, which is all nonprofit hospitals have to have it. So that's most hospitals in California, and they are required to inform folks. It's mostly for emergency room care. It's not for any type of appointment, but indigent people, uninsured, and underinsured folks might be eligible for charity care, and hospitals are required to inform people of this program and their right to apply for it. Student loans, there are different types of plans to help folks repay the debt, or perhaps receive forgiveness. So there's rehabilitation and consolidation. So that's consolidating different loans you might have, different types of repayment plans. So there's income-based repayment plans. So that's based on a certain percentage of your income. So, instead of thousands of dollars each month, you might only have to pay like $300 or a couple hundred. Loan forgiveness program. So after working in a certain field, for example, for 10 years, you might be able to have the rest of your debt forgiven. Statutory discharges. Unfortunately, this isn't something I know a ton about, but we do have a student loan team at HERA. So if you have questions about that, definitely feel free to call us. I have our contact information at the end of this presentation. Mortgages also, so you might be able to get a modification of your mortgage if you're dealing with a hardship issue. You might be able to refinance, and then there's also local reinstatement assistance programs. And I know there are also certain COVID protections right now, both with student loans and mortgages. And there are other attorneys at HERA who focus on homeowners. So if this is something you're dealing with and you're curious about the different types of relief that might be available to you regarding your mortgage, you can also feel free to give HERA a call. That's not something that I really focus on. Okay, and so what happens if you have a court judgment against you? Let me just check the time. Okay, so about 5 minutes, we'll open up to questions. So creditors cannot take money or property away from you unless they have successfully sued you in court and received a judgment against you. It's important to keep in mind that even if there is a judgment against you, some income and assets are protected from collections. So wage garnishment, no more than 25% of your wages can be garnished each pay period. There are some exceptions. Exemption 1, if you're very low income or part-time wage earner, 100% of your wages might possibly be able to be protected. Second exemption, if all of your wages are needed to support yourself or your dependents, your wages should be exempted from collections. And then there's COVID-19 exemption. Stimulus payments are exempted by state law from garnishment. Or possibly there could be a bank account levy if there's a judgment against you. So creditors can levy your bank account, but there are exceptions. Creditors cannot take money out of your bank account if the source of that money is protected by law. So, for example, most public benefits and Social Security are protected from collections. And then another exemption is wages in your bank account should be exempt so long as they are needed to support yourself and your dependents. And in this situation, yeah, you might, if you end up in this situation, it might be helpful to seek the assistance of an attorney to make sure that wages that should be protected aren't being garnished. So in order to take advantage of these protections, you do need to file a claim of exemption, and you only have 10 days to file this after you receive notice to prevent your income or assets from being taken, although you can also file the claim after the garnishment or levy has begun. Yeah, so it's important to act pretty quickly on this. So options for dealing with a debt collector, these are just kind of very general, but you could pay in full, settle for less than the full amount, negotiate some type of payment plan, dispute the debt, ignore, you obviously don't want to do this. Discharge in bankruptcy, this comes with a lot of potential complications and adverse consequences down the road. It can stay on your credit report. I believe it's for 10 years, but we have more information about that later. So yeah, you would definitely want to seek the assistance of a bankruptcy attorney there to understand kind of what the consequences would be if you try to discharge it in bankruptcy. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about medical debt. 26% of households have problems paying or an inability to pay medical bills in a recent survey. This was Kaiser. It's probably different now with COVID. I know there's a lot happening right now in terms of research and trying to figure out the data about medical bills and that sort of thing. So this is kind of general, but so it might actually be higher now. But a common scenario is an uninsured or underinsured patient goes to the emergency room for treatment and later gets a bill for thousands of dollars, or it might show up on their credit report. Sometimes we've had clients where they don't receive any sort of bill. They just only receive, or they only see that they owe thousands of dollars in medical debt on their credit report because the hospital hired a debt collection company. So they see a company they don't recognize on their credit report, and it's for thousands of dollars. Usually it'll say like medical debt, but a couple of the companies we see pretty often for medical debt cases is Rush, Curtis, and USCB. And then hospitals often don't inform patients of available financial assistance programs like charity care. And then unpaid hospital bills end up going to collection agencies and eventually debt collection lawsuits, and it can have negative effects on your credit. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about this already, but hospitals must have a discount charity care program for uninsured patients, underinsured, or those with high medical costs who are at or below 350% of the federal poverty level. And you can apply for charity care at any time. It doesn't matter if it's after the debt or after the appointment, or a year later because you see it on your credit report. You can apply at any time. Hospitals cannot charge more than the highest amount charted by government-sponsored health programs in which it participates. Debt collector cannot report negative information to credit bureaus or begin a lawsuit against a patient for non-payment until 150 days after the initial billing. And then if a hospital or debt collection company fails to comply with the California Hospital Fair Pricing Act, that can be raised as an affirmative defense in a debt collection lawsuit. So that means, let's say you get sued and the hospital didn't tell you about charity care and you believe you were eligible. They didn't tell you when you had an emergency room visit. You would definitely want to bring that up as a defense in a lawsuit, because it's very possible you might have actually owed a lot less than they're claiming, or you might not have owed anything at all. So here are just some other financial assistance related to health and medical needs. So California law says that counties must provide, quote, subsistence medical care for indigent adults with no other source of care. So in Contra Costa County, this program is called Contra Costa Cares, and here's a link to it. So before I get started on credit reporting, why don't we open it up to questions?
Sure, Misha. Either go ahead and raise your hand by using the reaction, the little smiley face. I'll also go into participants and allow everyone to unmute themselves, and we can have an open dialogue. Any questions out there?
Were there any questions in the chat? I see that you answered some of them, Nikki, so I'm not sure if there are any that haven't been answered yet.
Well, then why don't we do this? How's everyone feeling about the information? Is this either on task with things you already knew and it's being validated, or are there any aha moments for you based on the content that you've gotten thus far? Or anything that we could talk more about that we haven't covered? And it does look like, Naisha, there are some things in the chat that may start the conversation.
Okay. After the debt is paid off, will it be removed from your report? Well, so in this case, if let's say somebody, if the borrower falls behind and comes to some sort of agreement to pay the debt off, the creditor can still keep the entry on your credit report, but it would say pay it as agreed, though you should definitely try to ask and negotiate to get it completely removed from your credit report. If you're never behind, and if you just paid it off, every month, then yes, it should be removed from your credit report. And then I think, as I mentioned, negative entries, if they are correct, can stay on your credit report for 7 years. So let's say if you have a charge off or for a credit card, and it says you owe $4,000, and if you just don't pay anything or don't do anything and they don't sue you, for example, and it is correct and you don't dispute it, that can stay on for 7 years. And then it should just be fall off of your credit report. If it doesn't, then you would definitely want to contact the credit reporting agencies to dispute that. And then also, well, you should contact the creditors and the credit reporting agencies and say, this should be removed. You should stop furnishing this information to the credit reporting agencies because it's old debt and it's past the 7 years. Is there any difference between interest and late fees on a credit card payment? Yes. So a late fee is, let's say you're 7 days late on paying. The credit card company could charge, I think they probably have different late fees, but maybe $50 or something like that. And then that would be added to what you owe. And then interest is a percentage of what you owe each month. That, let's say you miss a payment, then I'm going to try to use an easy example. Let's say you have $100 payment and then the interest rate is, let's say it's 10%, and let's say you miss a payment, then the credit card company could charge you 10%. So then you would owe $110 instead of just $100. Okay, let me just, I think there was a question about, well, okay, so Rachel says, I didn't know there was a time period, 4 years to collect a debt. So that's, sorry if I was a little unclear. So technically, let's say as debt collector, they can sue you after, they can try to still collect the debt after 4 years, but they just can't sue you. So there is a difference there. But it's kind of up to people whether or not they want to pay on what's called time barred debt. The debt collector can't imply that you might be able to be sued, for this debt, and can't intimidate you when you can't be sued. So there are some distinctions there. And we also had a case where a medical debt company was reporting someone's debt that was 10 years old. And so they kind of implied that she still owed it, but she didn't. So yeah, let's say, it's been more than 7 years, that debt can't show up on your credit report, and then you also can't be sued, but the debt collector might still just have that debt in their internal files or something, but you don't owe anything to them anymore. There's nothing that can really happen to you if you don't pay. Credit reporting statute of limitations is 7 years. When does the clock start ticking? So it's 7 years from the first late payment. So let's say you're 30 days late and you never pay again, it would start from being a month later. So let's say you stop paying January, you don't pay January, the statute of limitations would start February 1st.
Now, you should just want to remind everyone, that you do have the ability to unmute yourself. So Rachel, I believe you had a statement or comment. So you should be able to unmute yourself and ask your question or make your statement.
Do I need to do anything? So Rachel can ask her question.
No, I'm going to go ahead and manually do it.
Okay.
Rachel, it looks like you are unmuted, so go ahead and ask your question. Okay, are there any other questions out there before you continue? Oh, okay, it looks like Rachel got her question answered. Thank you, Rachel.
Okay, great. Okay, yeah, so I'm going to start going through the content again because I don't want us to run short on time. So let me just find my spot. Okay, so credit reporting. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about credit reporting. So credit reports are important, as I'm sure you all know. So, different creditors might ask for a copy of your credit report or to be able to run your credit check before deciding whether or not to, for example, give you a loan or a mortgage or an auto loan, credit cards. Also, a lot of landlords ask to run your credit report to decide whether or not to rent to you. Also, some insurance companies check this too. And then in some cases, employment even can check your credit report. So a good credit report can save you money and open opportunities, and a bad credit report can cost you more money and close opportunities. But it is important to note that you can turn around a difficult bad credit report. It does take time and a lot of effort and energy, but it's definitely possible. So just don't lose hope. So your credit report is an indicator of your financial wellness. As I'm sure a lot of folks know, a credit report is a report that collects information about your bill paying history, public record information, which can include, if there are any lawsuits or judgments against you. Not all lawsuits are public. So there are some exceptions to this. And just, student loans, a general record of your applications for credit, and paying back credit cards, paying your mortgage, for example. Your credit report shows information about how you've used credit, such as how much credit you have, how much of your available credit you are using, whether you've made your payments on time, and whether anyone has sent a delinquent late debt you owe to a debt collector. So this is, again, just some of the information. Any accounts that aren't with a collection agency will show up, and inquiries. So an inquiry, there's a hard inquiry and a soft inquiry. A hard inquiry is when you apply for credit and the lender reviews your credit report. And then a soft inquiry is when a creditor sends you, for example, promotional materials. And then it's important to note that a credit report isn't the same as your credit score. Your credit report is used to create your credit score. So you have a lot of rights and protections related to your credit report. You have a right to access your credit report for free under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. So typically, pre-COVID, you could only get a free credit report once a year, but now with COVID, and this is going to end in April, so definitely make sure to try to get it soon. But folks have been able to get their credit report for free every week. And then this is really important. This is the only website you should use. There are a lot of scams out there, so make sure if you're going to try to get your credit report, use this annualcreditreport.com. You can also request your report on the phone or by mail, and you go here to print out the form. And you have rights to have errors on your credit report corrected. So if you dispute information on a credit report, the credit reporting agency has a duty to conduct what's called a reasonable reinvestigation to determine whether the disputed information is inaccurate and record the current status of the disputed information. So they have to, let's say you dispute a debt, credit card debt, the credit reporting agency has to investigate that and update that on your credit report and follow up with you. So with COVID-19, creditors are making accommodations. So for example, forbearance, in some cases, reduced payments. This isn't necessarily set in stone, but some creditors might be more likely to try to reach some sort of settlement agreement with folks who are having trouble paying during COVID-19. And if a debtor was current before, a creditor is generally required to report the account as current during the accommodation. Let's say they agree to a reduced monthly payment or something like that. If the account was delinquent, a creditor is not allowed to report the delinquency during the accommodation. A credit reporting agency only has an obligation to modify or delete a trade line as appropriate if it is found to be inaccurate or incomplete or cannot be verified. So sometimes, the credit reporting agency, unfortunately doesn't agree with what you're saying. In some cases, you might be able to escalate it. It depends on kind of, what your legal basis is, but just because something is negative on your credit report and you dispute it doesn't automatically mean that the credit reporting agency is going to delete it from your credit report, but they are required to update it on your credit report and say it's in dispute. There are special rights for identity theft victims, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later. Reporting of negative information, as I stated earlier, negative information generally can be reported for 7 years if it's accurate and you dispute it and you don't dispute it. But bankruptcy can be reported for up to 10 years. Right to dispute unauthorized use. You have a right to bring a civil action against anyone who improperly obtains access to a file, knowingly or willfully misuses file data, or fails to correct inaccurate information on your credit report. Oops. So reading your credit report, it takes time. It can be confusing. It took me a lot of time to try to understand it. There are a lot of different terms, and different credit reporting agencies use different, abbreviations. So definitely takes some time. So this is like an example of what might show up on somebody's credit report. So what you want to look out for is delinquency. Is the account past due? How many days? So here, Little Town Bank, balance is 14,285, says 30 days past due. It's a auto loan. The balance is 16,500. The person's past due by $395. So we're at 30 days. So they owe $395 a month. Charge off, has account been charged off by the creditor? Again, this is like an internal process with the creditor, and usually it should say on the person's credit report, charge off, or it might say CO. It doesn't look like it says that here. So here, if you'll see here, see it said past due 000. So here in August, the person now has past due $395. And I won't show charge off this early because it's been too soon. So 30 days, it'll just say past due 30 days. Current balance, how much is still owed. Usually if it's in collections, it will say in collections on the credit report. And then if you don't recognize the name of the account, sometimes at the bottom of the credit report, it might say who the original creditor is, but if you don't recognize the name, it's possible it's a debt buyer or debt collector. Okay, so how to dispute errors on your credit report. You should tell the credit reporting agency and the furnisher, furnisher, that's the, for example, debt collection company that's reporting this information on your credit report. So the first step is tell the credit reporting agency in writing what information you think is inaccurate. It's best to dispute by certified mail and return receipt and make copies. Definitely don't just have the original and not make any copies. Identify the information that is wrong and explain why it's wrong, and include any documents that show why it's wrong. And then the credit reporting agencies generally must respond within 30 days. This can be extended up to 45 days. And just keep in mind that we've learned that during COVID, some credit reporting agencies are taking longer with this timeline. And then the second step is to tell the information provider, which is the furnisher, that, again, this is the person, the company or organization that provides information about you to the credit reporting agency. So it provides the information about your debt. So inform them that you dispute an item on your credit report. And then if the provider, the furnisher, continues to report the item you disputed to a credit reporting company, it must let the company know about your dispute. If you're correct, meaning if the information you dispute is found to be inaccurate or incomplete, the information provider must tell the credit reporting company to update or delete the item. And so here's a sample letter, sample dispute letter. And then again, you might want to try to get some help from a legal aid organization because there might be a kind of more complex legal reason why you dispute it, and then also providing documentation can definitely help as well. So here are some things that you can do to help improve your credit report over time. A lot of what we've been talking about, dispute any errors you see, and then try to find safe alternative credit building products like secured credit cards and affordable loans. Also just remembered HERA has a website called Money Happy. I can put it in the link at the end. I'm sorry, I can put it in the chat box at the end. And that provides some resources for affordable alternatives. Definitely pay bills on time. Try to keep the amount of credit that you use, so the spending, to less than 30% of the limit. Resolve student loan debt. Try to plan to take care of any outstanding judgments and liens. Use different credit sources. Try to apply for charity care if you're eligible. try to negotiate and create payment plans with the creditor before, ideally before they file a lawsuit. And again, as I mentioned before, watch out for scams. There are some companies out there that collect money, from you, saying that they're going to repair your credit and the debt that you owe, and then don't end up doing much. So that's definitely important to keep an eye out for. And then, this is pretty obvious, but don't use a fake social security number to try to get credit. It's a crime, as I'm sure you all know. Okay. So now I'll talk a little bit about the rental process and credit. I'm not sure if many of you are renters or are looking to rent, but just in general, some things to know. You have a right to request a copy of the credit report or tenant screening report a landlord uses when deciding whether or not to rent a unit to you. And you should definitely make that request in writing. So let's say a landlord denies your rental application and says it was because of your credit, or at least partially because of your credit. The landlord must provide you with a letter stating that the denial was partly or entirely based on your credit or the tenant screening report, and provide the name, address, and phone number of the reporting agency so you can get a copy of the report. And then a statement that you have the right to obtain a free copy of the credit report. Just definitely try to get the specific report that the landlord relied on, though, because that way you're clear on the information that they looked to when making a decision. Okay, so when can an eviction be reported on our credit report? So this is California law. There's an exception right now going on because of COVID, but let's say pre-COVID, or there were no COVID, generally only if the landlord gets a judgment, meaning the landlord wins the eviction within 60 days of filing the unlawful detainer or upon order of the court. But right now, for non-payment of rent evictions during COVID, so this is, let's say an eviction was filed against you for non-payment of rent beginning somewhere around mid-March 2020 or anytime until June 30th, 2021, that eviction cannot be reported at all, even if you lost. And this is a new law in California called SB 91, or the Tenant Relief Act of 2021. But let's say you get, right now, I don't know, this might change, but let's say you get evicted July 15th for a non-payment of rent, that could be reported if nothing changes with the law. Unpaid rent during COVID can be reported on tenants' credit reports. And beginning, I believe it's August 1st, folks can be sued in small claims court by landlords for unpaid rent during COVID. There's a whole nother kind of section that I don't think we have time, unless there's time at the end, to answer some questions about this law and COVID debt, COVID rent debt. So maybe if we have time at the end for questions about that, I can answer them. So what to know about the rental process and credit. Again, it's legal for a landlord to deny your rental application if your credit report is frozen due to identity theft. So I'll get into this in a little bit, but if you freeze your credit report because your identity has been stolen, and when the landlord goes to try to check your credit, it's frozen, the landlord can deny you. So to avoid this problem, you can suspend the freeze for a certain period of time. So if you know you're going to be applying for rentals, you can suspend the freeze so the landlord can access your credit, or you can give the credit reporting agency permission to provide your report to the landlord. So identity theft, just some basic information. Somebody uses your personal information or pretends to be you and spends a lot of money or applies for a credit card in your name. They might use your social security number, Medicare number, credit card, bank account. They spend a lot of money. They might try to get medical care using, your Medicare information. They can file taxes in your name. So here are some signs to look out for, and how to make sure that you're not, how to potentially prevent this. So just definitely make sure to read your statements, read explanation of your health benefits, check your bills. If you notice any exorbitant charges, or if you receive a fishy email with charges you don't recognize, and then check your credit report regularly. Some warning signs: you see withdrawals from your bank that you can't explain, you don't get your bills or other mail, merchants refuse your checks, debt collectors call you about debts that you don't recognize and aren't yours, you receive bills for services you didn't use, notice of data breach at a company where you do business or have an account. Here are some other red flags that you might see on your credit report. So there's a lot of uncommon names or addresses where you've never lived before, credit accounts you don't recognize, wrong birth date, for example, we've seen that, accounts and collections for debts you didn't have, unknown hard inquiries. So again, that means when you are the person who applies for credit. So if you see a hard inquiry, usually the inquiries are down at the bottom of a credit report. Sorry. So if you see any, hard inquiries for companies you don't recognize, that could definitely be a red flag. Okay, so how to prevent identity theft? Lock up all of your financial records, limit what you carry on you, like don't carry your social security card, that sort of thing. Shred what you don't need. A lot of this is pretty obvious. Don't share personal information. Don't be in a public place when you're talking, with a credit card company. Use antivirus software. Don't open links from strangers. Secure your passwords and all of that. Collect your mail every day. Open your mail regularly. That's just, in general, open your mail daily. You definitely don't want to miss anything from a debt collector. For example, that is actually true because there are deadlines that you'll want to keep aware of. Review credit card and bank account statements and pay attention. Check your bank account regularly to make sure you don't see anything that you don't recognize. And check your credit card and bank accounts, banks' policies regarding identity theft protection. So if you're a victim of identity theft, you should follow these steps. Place a fraud alert with the credit reporting agencies. Get your free credit reports, and then create an identity theft report. So create the Federal Trade Commission. Has a website where you complete a complaint, and then you should file a police report, and then you can use that police report when you file the complaint with the Federal Trade Commission. And then again, always save copies of letters and requests and record dates, and make sure to send everything with tracking and make copies of any letters you send. So to place a fraud alert with the credit reporting agencies, here are just kind of the basic way you do that. So you'll report you're a victim of identity theft, ask the company to put a fraud alert on your credit file, confirm that the company you call will contact the other two companies, meaning the other credit reporting agencies. So there are three main credit reporting agencies: TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian. So if you call one of those agencies, they have to contact the other two. And the initial fraud alert stays on your report for 90 days. You can try to get an extended fraud alert. That's 7-year fraud alert on your credit report. It does make it more difficult for an identity thief to open new accounts in your name. There are requirements for placing an extended fraud alert, differ slightly for each company, so you want to check that out specifically for each company. But this could be a little, sometimes it might be a little bit harder to actually get credit that you want, because it can be a little more cumbersome to get the credit report information. So, and then you would just want to print out your complaint with the Federal Trade Commission. So get your free credit reports. Again, I provided that link. Explain to the credit reporting agencies that you placed an initial fraud alert. Get your free copy of your credit report, and then ask each company to only show the last 4 digits of your social security number on your report. So here's some more information about how to submit an identity theft report to the FTC. So you want to print a copy of the report, and which is called the identity theft affidavit, which is essentially you're claiming that you've been a victim of identity theft, and you want to bring that with you when you file a police report. File a police report about the identity theft and get a copy of the police report, your FTC identity theft affidavit, and your police report. Make a completed identity theft report. So then you would send copies to any accounts or collection agencies seeking payment for fraudulent charges, and consider canceling any compromised bank, credit, or other accounts. And then again, always save letters, and then make sure you have the right dates. Here's just a screenshot of what the FTC identity theft claim portal looks like. Oh, okay. So there we are. I'm happy to answer any questions at this point that you might have about anything we've discussed. Just make sure that they're not confidential. Like I know there are other folks on the call, and I can't answer confidential questions in this type of setting, but you're welcome to call Hera if you have questions about any of what personal questions about anything we've talked about today. And here's a summary of the other services that we can provide.
Well, Nisha, you must do this often, because you ended right on time, definitely giving folks time to kind of take it all in. I see this really being a reference tool, because although it's a lot of information, if you're going through this process, I think it's very valuable to be able to go back and get all of the tips and processes. And Hera is one of our trusted partners at Richmond Neighborhood Housing Services. Being a housing counseling agency, we do tend to get engaged with credit, but when we have to roll up our sleeves and take a deep dive, we always call on Hera, because they really are the subject matter experts and also provide you the legal counsel. So please lean on them depending on where you are in credit. The other thing I'll share is when we go through our pre-purchase workshops, or even some of these other money matter conversations, we know typically there's 2 reasons why credit issues happen. It's either through a behavioral issue or a life issue and situation. And depending on where you're wanting to leverage your credit, if it is a life issue like COVID, death, divorce, loss of job, from a lender and creditor, those things can be explained. The behavioral issues are ones that are a little bit more problematic to explain, to where a lender or creditor would have the confidence of extending credit. So if you're going down this path, really recommend you to understand what was the reason for the issue. If it's behavioral, really want to unpack that to understand the why, because there's a statistic, and it may have even been updated since the last time I checked, but they say when people are restructuring their debt or doing their credit repair, if they haven't addressed the behaviors that got them there, they're going to be in the same situation in the next 3 to 5 years. And that is part of what our counseling sessions are all about. So those are my comments. We always appreciate the content. This is the opportunity for you to engage, ask questions, again, in a very general sense, because We know a lot of these questions can be personal, but we want to do that offline. But if you have a general question or comment, this would be your time. And while you're thinking of that, and just reminding everyone, you can unmute yourself. You know, anytime you come in one of our courses, we always have an incentive to participate. So 2 things. If you haven't gotten the survey already, Tisha will be sending you a survey about tonight's class tomorrow. By completing that survey, it really just helps us understand what's working well, what's not, how do we need to improve, or what things we need to keep the same. So your feedback is critically important. But if you return the survey by end of day Friday, then either you have the option of a $25 gift card to Target. Well, it's enter to win. Not everyone gets one, but you enter the drawing. Or you can request to get your tri-merge report, which are the 3 credit bureaus, TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian, which will have your credit score. And that is considered a soft pull because we're a service agency, not looking to extend credit. So when we go in and look at your credit report, it doesn't come up as a hard pull, so it won't impact your credit. You can have your choice, either get the gift card or access to your credit report that shows your credit score. For one, your participation in tonight's class, as well as participating in the survey. So I will stop there and open it up to the audience. Please take the time to leverage the expertise in the room. And we have until 7:30, so please ask your questions.
Thank you, Nisha, and thank you, Nikki. I had a question for one or both of you about APR. I'm not terribly familiar with what it is. I think it was on slide 6, maybe, the one with the lollipops, where I know one of those was like a 7.99% APR, one was 100. I just didn't really know how we ought to be taking those into account.
Nisha, I will answer from the lender perspective. Your interest rate is the interest of the loan. So you go in, get a car at 4.99%. And when you get that big yellow piece of paper, it says your interest rate is 4.99%, but your APR is 5.996%. The difference are all of the fees that are being amortized and financed in the total cost of the loan. So if you are financing your gap insurance, or you're financing the title fees, whatever those other costs that you didn't pay out of pocket are absorbed as a fee, that's the total APR. And for a mortgage conversation, if you are financing the loan fees or any of the other fees attached that are outside of the pure interest rate, the lender is required to tell you what the total cost of your loan is. And that's why the APR matters, because you can walk out, so I got 4.99%, but over the course of the loan, you may be paying closer to 6 or 7%. And I think that's what that lollipop example was showing. So if there's a significant difference, you want to unpack what's making up those additional costs that is making the overall cost of the loan so expensive. And Nisha, please add any of your feedback or comments to the APR question.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds right to me. I might have actually misspoke earlier when I was talking about this. So the APR is the cost of your credit at a yearly rate. So it's a percentage. So again, it takes all of the fees and that sort of thing, everything, not just the monthly amount, but let's say late fees or that sort of thing, at a yearly rate. So
Thank you very
obviously, if you have a higher APR, yeah. You're welcome.
And if I can just add on one question to there, I was just looking at the slide. It looks like essentially, I see the APR, the finance charge, and the amount financed. So it appears like the finance charge is partially made up of basically like the APR times the amount
Let me
financed.
go to that. Let me just go to that slide so you all can see it. Okay, so sorry, do you mind repeating that that second part of your question?
Sure. I was just thinking, it looks like the finance charge is like the APR times the amount financed plus a little bit more that's not quite in there, maybe? I was just thinking for like looking at the
Possibly
one on the
that is getting into the kind of nitty gritty. Yeah,
okay.
I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to kind of double check on that, but yeah. So let's see here. Let's just go to the definition slide. So the APR is the cost of your credit at a yearly rate. So like the percentage of how much the percentage of how much you're paying to receive this credit, if that makes sense. The finance
So-
charge is the dollar amount your credit will cost you. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Sorry, there's a lag. So it looks like sort of the APR and the finance charge are basically the same thing. One's just a dollar amount, one's a percentage.
Yeah, that's what it looks like to me. But and then the amount finance is the amount of credit provided to you on behalf of the lender or on your behalf.
Thank you very, very much.
You're welcome. I'll take a look at the chat. Let me just check the time. We have just a few more minutes so I can answer one more question.
And also for those that have been active in the chat, I also put up a couple of resources. One is a credit tool that we have created. So if you're trying to get your credit in order and straight, it's a great tool to start listing all your credit, the amounts you owe, the interest rates, all of that. We also, for the rental conversation, which is an important one, this is the first time, I believe, in the history of landlords and renters where unpaid debt can actually go toward a collection request to where it could impact your credit score, our credit report. So housing is key is a state resource that just launched March 15th. So if you are in that situation, trying to address the funds needed to take care of back rents, know that that's a resource. Because again, these are unprecedented times. So there are a lot of resources out there if there are some rent issues that you're having.
Yeah, and maybe I can just finish with just a very brief summary of the rental debt and COVID. So under the new law, I mentioned the Tenant Relief Act of 2021 in California. This is California only. If folks have been late on rent due to some COVID reason, and that can be kind of general. And if I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this, it might be possible. I'll just say it might be possible because I don't have enough time to get into kind of the specifics. But if folks have fallen behind on rent from like, let's say last mid-March to are currently behind, and then know that you'll be behind on rent up until the end of June, there is a statewide program that some folks might be eligible for, and as well as some landlords, which give landlords the opportunity to receive 80% of the debt owed, but they would have to waive 20% of that debt owed. But landlords aren't required to participate in this. If landlords don't participate in it, then tenants, if they are eligible, can apply for to receive 25% of the back rent they owe, and then would provide that to the landlord. So in order to avoid eviction for non-payment of rent under this new law, tenants will need to, and let's say the non-payment of rent issue is related to COVID in some way, tenants need to pay at least 25% of the total back rent owed to the landlord by June 30th, and it can be in a lump sum. And then they also have to provide a declaration stating that the debt, the rental back rent owed is related to COVID. And we have more information about that. And so you're welcome. If you want to learn more, you can contact us. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to get into the specifics, but yeah, just wanted folks to be aware of that. Okay. So I think that's all the time we have today. I hope that was really helpful. Nikki, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add.
No, I'll say, please remember to complete your surveys. If you need additional assistance, if you haven't already received the presentation, that'll also be forwarded to you on Monday. Always appreciate, or not Monday, tomorrow. Always appreciate you following our financial journey. As Nisha said, claiming all of this was valuable, and you know where to find us in between time if we need to assist you any further. So you guys have an awesome St. Patrick's Day. You guys mean a lot because it's my birthday and I wouldn't have missed it for the world.
Happy birthday.
So enjoy your St. Patty's Day, enjoy your evening, and look forward to seeing or talking to you all very soon. Have a good night.
Bye.
Thank you for the birthday wish. Guys, have a good night.